Do Crohn's disease symptoms keep coming back? Tremfya guselkumab may help. At 12 weeks, rapid symptom remission was achieved in most patients taking Tremfya, and some experienced visible improvement of their intestinal lining at 12 weeks and 1 year. Individual results may vary. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active Crohn's disease. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections and liver problems may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Explore what's possible and ask your doctor about Tremfya today. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more or visit tremfyaradio.com.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Building a business may feel like a big jump, but OnDeck Small Business Loans can help keep you afloat. With lines of credit up to $100,000 and term loans up to $250,000, OnDeck lets you choose the loan that's right for your business. As a top-rated online small business lender, OnDeck's team of loan advisors can help you find the right business loan to fit your needs. Visit OnDeck.com for more information. Depending on certain loan attributes, your business loan may be issued by OnDeck or Celtic Bank. OnDeck does not lend in North Dakota. All loans and amounts subject to lender approval.
Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan. Our co-host, Nick Stevens, is out this week, but we're happy to be joined for the second episode in a row by John Meoli of the Baltimore Banner, our most frequent guest in Orioles on the Verge history. So, John, it had been a few months since we had last had you on, but it's good to have you back.
Yeah, I was, I reached out to Bob last week because my Patreon didn't process, and it was more just like, hey man, I exist. I wanted to give you guys some money, but I also wanted them to know, and then it did end up processing. It worked out, but I didn't want you guys to think that I was abandoning ship, and vice versa. I didn't want to be abandoned either.
No, we're definitely not abandoning the.
Once the money came
Banner.
in, I reached out.
Yeah, this guy's payment go. I remember what it was like when you'd see the when I would see like the canceled, when the numbers would like go down one on Substack. Like, what the heck happened? And you see it was somebody like, payment failed, and it's like, well, they didn't choose to do this, or maybe they did, and we'll say they didn't choose. It wasn't like an active cancellation.
No, it happens. It happens.
But you always notice, and I understand what it's like.
We'll talk now about one of the big moves that happened in the organization at the beginning of this week, which is Nestor Herman making the jump from High A Aberdeen to Double A Chesapeake. And Herman's rise through this organization over the last year has been one of the more fascinating stories I think we could have seen play out, in that Herman was drafted by the Orioles out of Seattle University in the 11th round of the 2023 draft with very little public information available about what kind of pitcher he was, what his stuff was like. But this organization had confidence in him, and so far it has paid off. After a very strong 2024 season, he got off to a phenomenal start this year at Aberdeen. Through 6 outings, he threw 25 innings, striking out 37 batters while walking 10. That allowed him to earn the jump up to Double A Chesapeake. And there has been a group of pitchers at High A so far this year that you look at them and you think they pitched fairly well there at the level. Last year, they should be early season promotion candidates. It was Herman, Trey Gibson, and Michael Ferret. Ferret is on the IL right now. Gibson has gotten off to a solid start, but Herman jumps up to Double A before either one of them. And John, I want to start with you because, as I was saying there in the intro, Herman was not a guy that I think we knew a whole lot about when the Orioles drafted him, and it really was not until early last season that we started to see the signs of the kind of pitcher that he can be. So what have your thoughts been on his rise so far?
Yeah, I think this is an easy thing to say now, as all these guys are popping up, but we're going to look back on that 2023 draft on the pitching side and realize that they had really figured out like what they were looking for and like how to find find guys with the raw tools they wanted and knew what, and knew what they should be doing. For him specifically, as I was making my calls last year, in the off season, like it was a good scouting analytics mix, but like they basically like saw a guy they thought should be throwing harder, should be having better results, had the stuff that they wanted, and it just wasn't playing out. And it's one of those collaborative efforts where you get somebody who has the raw tools in here and you make it so that the coaches can kind of do their thing, and you're not changing a ton, you're just helping somebody be the best version of themselves. And I think he's definitely done that. It was a fastball that was in the low 90s as he was getting drafted, and then it was up into the mid 90s, and that's like that changes who you are as a pitcher just alone. He also threw his fastball a ton in college. I'm looking at it now. He's basically throwing like 2/3 of the time in college, and that's not a recipe for success either, especially when it's in the low 90s. So you get somebody with the makings of a bunch of good secondary pitches. You get somebody whose fastball can be better than it is, and you have the makings of a really good pitcher. The fact that he's jumping up first, or not, I shouldn't say first. I guess Braxton Bragg was ultimately first out of that group. But what I think, and we might have even talked about this, like it seems like not that they're being more aggressive, but they're being a lot more liberal and like, okay, like what are we doing here? Why are you still at this level? You have mastered this level. You are not going to improve at this level. We kind of saw it a little bit with hitters in the early part. They still had, plate appearance benchmarks where they tried to get to them. But I think you're seeing now, like these guys, once there's space for them and there's innings for them and there's not a lot left for them to gain where they are, they're going to move up. And I think that's going to change the perception of these pitchers in a meaningful way going forward.
Yeah, that's a good call. Because even with Braxton Bragg, it was like he pitched all last year in Delmarva. Starts in Aberdeen and 3 starts. He's up to AA. They were like, okay, We've seen enough. you can move on up.
Yeah. And that's what you have to do. If when they had realized he was like too good for Delmarva last year, they'd moved him up, then it wouldn't have been a conversation. The reality was they had too many pitchers at a lot of levels last year. And the best way to get him stretched out, he was only a starter his last year at Dallas Baptist. He was a reliever all 3 years, I believe, before that in Nebraska. Like the only way to get him stretched out was to keep him in Delmarva and get him to the innings amount that he had. He wasn't going to get worse. He was only going to build up arm strength and get better in that sense. And that's how that decision was made. But, if on merit, he would have been promoted. So if you look at it on that view, then it's not, yes, he popped up, but he's also not somebody who like wasn't deserving of a promotion. It was just felt circumstantial at the time.
Yeah, and it does seem like they are willing to promote these guys quicker until they get to AA, because you have a bunch of guys in AAA that they want, and I get it. They want to sign guys like Yarmil Geraldo, who I think looks really good. Looks like he could be a great find, but you got like Dylan Coleman, Nate Webb, Carlos Tavera. Now Luis Castillo, the other Luis Castillo, Matt Bowman, etc. But then you got like Keegan Gillies, who looks like he's mastered AA. 17 strikeouts to 1 walk in almost 15 innings, 1.23 ERA. Dylan Hyde went up, came back down this past week. So yeah, that's that building the barrier right there between AA and AAA. How do we get past that?
Yeah, no, and honestly, like you need a quorum of you need a lot of guys who you need these guys to be that usable depth, and that's the next. I mean, once that happens, and there's enough guys who they feel comfortable being like, oh, whose day is it to pitch in Norfolk? Like, let's get him up here in the bullpen. You hope they're better than TJ McFarland's had a great career, but like those types of guys who are just like there and like youngish and goodish, and like you just bring them up and they pitch, and then if you don't need them, they go down. Like that's a hard barrier to overcome. They also seem like they're pretty not rigid, but they're pretty. It seems like there's a high threshold for them to be one of those guys. Either you're one of those guys who's up and down, or you're one of those guys who use, or you're just not. So it doesn't really matter if you're like a 28-year-old who's who's been around forever, or like a 24-year-old who's getting his first taste in AAA. It seems like if you're not one of those guys, you're not one of those guys. But the presence of those guys feels challenging to what we're talking about for sure.
So going back to Herman for a minute, I think one of the things that's worth pointing out, I mentioned that he had 10 walks this season. It's worth noting that a quarter of them came in one outing, which was against Jersey Shore, and it was the second start of the year. So the command has actually been really good to this point. Now, John, I want to go back to something we were just talking about here, which is that jump from AA to AAA. And Keegan Gillis, when he was on our show last week, talked about the challenges in adjusting to the different baseball that's a AAA as opposed to AA. And we know that there are some other underlying things that can make that jump more challenging other than the better hitters. There's a difference in the strike zone, the fact that you can challenge pitches at AAA, which you can't do down at AA. So do you think it's fair to say at this point that that jump from AA to AAA is the, outside of AAA, the majors, the highest threshold for the Orioles to figure out if a guy is going to get promoted? They're going to have to show a lot more at AA to get to AAA than they did at high A to get to AA.
Yeah, I think that's fair. What's ultimately challenging, and I think as we're talking about, somebody like Braxton Bragg, who is, spent all of last year in Delmarva because that's where the innings were. You're not like you can do whatever you want, not whatever you want, but like you can have tandem starters in AA. Like you can get guys can get better and be pitching in that structure in AA, and you're good. You can't really have on like a 13-man AAA pitching staff, like 9 guys who are pitching 4 innings at a time. The starters need to be built up as starters, and the relievers need to work like relievers because that's what they're going to do in the big leagues. So it's a structural change in how guys are used. So it's a huge jump, and you have to be ready for that. But you go from being one of 7, 8, 9 bulk pitchers to needing to break into a group of 5. And you can maybe have some kind of piggyback or tandem one day in AAA, maybe, but that's not really how it operates because those guys need to, Chase McDermott's not going to be going 4 and 80 once he's healthy. He needs to, they want him going into the 6 and 7 and being pitch efficient and get it showing he's somebody who can get back. Trevor Rogers, same thing. Like those guys are preparing to pitch in the big leagues in a way that you don't have to. So it's a big threshold. It's a big jump, and there are a lot of them. We've seen pitchers who have had the jump from Florida to Delmarva be challenging. Like the jump, I think you can move fast within the minors, but I think you're right in that's. And I'm not sure how much of it's talent and how much of it's like structural. But as I'm talking it through, it feels like it's a structural issue. Getting pitchers to AAA that is an impediment in a way that I'm sure a lot of these guys probably aren't thrilled about at this point because that's a long time to be in Bowie.
Which is why it's cool that Levi Wells was able to throw a quality start at AA, 6 innings, only gave up 2 runs. But real quick, back to Herman and Wells and Bragg. I've been preaching that, we've been preaching in general that year the pitcher was last year. Like all these pitchers were starting to hit the 2023 draft class. It's a matter of time for you're really going to start to see the depth of the pitching in the system. And this year they're starting to get to that AA level. I've heard you keep talking about this pitching, but no top 100 prospects that are pitchers. I feel like now that these guys are getting to AA and having success at AA, that's when you might start to see them mentioned in the lists and get the bigger profile.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, you guys clocked it. I think I said in the BA chat, somebody told me about Nestor Herman that if he was a Yankees prospect or a Dodgers prospect and had the stuff he had in the season he had, he would have been like a top 100 guy.
Right.
And people would be talking about that. The way BA works is that they take the handful, they scale everything out over the 30 teams and the guys who are ranked in this tier and the Orioles pitchers didn't get to that point to be able to do that. But I think I think Trey Gibson was 4 on the ESPN list. Like these guys are popping up in a way that, it's true. And you're also the reason that's going to happen is because we're talking about multiple pitchers now who throw consistently starters with starter bodies and starter frames who throw in the mid 90s consistently and can grab higher than that and have 2, 3, 4 secondaries that they can use in games. And some of them are legit out pitches that project well to the major league level. They're adding more consistently. Like, I talk to people who watch some of these guys pitch and are like, these guys should just pick 3 of these and go let it rip. And like, that's not really what's going to happen around here. But if you were somebody who just had like 3+ pitches and didn't throw 2 pitches that you were working on, you might be regarded a little differently. I'm not sure that's going to change how the Orioles develop guys, but we've had a lot of conversations about like the pitching program here. I went on a rant on our own podcast, the Banner Baseball Show, about how it all got to this point. I tried to write about it. It's challenging because they're doing everything exactly how they want to be doing it and are doing everything exactly how they plan to. And it's hard to say that, like, when you see the output to the major leagues, that everything is going great. And that is a fair criticism, because the Orioles should be in a position by now to be able to supplement their major league pitching staff with pitchers. But like, the circumstances of why that hasn't necessarily been the case of like the homegrown kinds, Cade Povich exists, he was a trade guy. It feels like complicated, but it's like feels challenging to be sitting here like all these years later being like, oh, if you just wait. But that is at this point what's going to like sustain success. This team's not good at the moment. But if this team is going to be good going forward, the lineup is the lineup. But like, to have these guys who are able to support the pitching staff and be homegrown starters, like, that would be the thing that makes this team good for longer than people thought or think might be happening, especially now when they're not actually good.
No, yeah, especially you're totally right, because especially if you count Povich and McDermott, which to me they were traded for, they were lesser regarded. Orioles kind of developed them into a higher regard as they got up to the higher minors, but some people say that doesn't count as developing. But yeah, it's interesting. Maybe if Chase McDermott and Brandon Young had started the season / stayed healthy, maybe it's a little bit different conversation, but unfortunately it's just not the case.
Yeah, and think about all the pitchers that we talked about in like 2021 and 2022 and even like 2023, who are the guys that were like the ones that were distinguishing themselves. Pretty much all of them like got hurt. Yeah, pretty much all of them have Tommy John, and like that's kind of what happens. Not to that extent, but if you're wondering why all the things that we talked about have happened, like, that's an easy place to start, is that, maybe these guys all weren't great. Maybe they were just striking out a bunch of guys in Aberdeen and like the minors were weird in 2021 because nobody played baseball for a year. But maybe they were good and got hurt. Maybe they weren't. I don't know. Like, now Brandon Young is a big leaguer, having gotten through that. Other guys will get through that, but it's not on the timeline that anyone would have thought looking at this stuff like 3 years ago.
Yeah, Gene Pinto hasn't pitched since 2023. Where are you?
Yeah, pour one out.
Running a business is hard work. Building your website shouldn't be. With Wix, you can express your ideas, give direction, then leave the heavy lifting to AI. From site creation to branded content and images. Have fun with the details. Customize what you want the way you want. And manage your whole business from a centralized dashboard with expert AI tools. Build, scale, and enjoy the incredible results. You can do it all yourself on Wix.
Building a business may feel like a big jump, but OnDeck Small Business Loans can help keep you afloat. With lines of credit up to $100,000 and term loans up to $250,000, OnDeck lets you choose the loan that's right for your business. As a top-rated online small business lender, OnDeck's team of loan advisors can help you find the right business loan to fit your needs. Visit OnDeck.com for more information. Depending on certain loan attributes, your business loan may be issued by OnDeck or Celtic Bank. OnDeck does not lend in North Dakota. All loans and amounts subject to lender approval.
Yeah, John, I know you wrote about this recently. You looked back at that 2020 year with the alt site, and it felt like the hitting program took a massive step forward despite not having the full season. And the pitching program, the pieces were there. They were putting the infrastructure in place, but Would you say that it's fair to say that the pitching program has probably always been a year or two behind the hitting program to this point?
I think that's probably fair. I would say they were trying to do different things at the time, and I think there's also a difference between like the early like Chris Holt days and like some of the more recent stuff that have happened. The Orioles spent a lot of time trying to get older pitchers better at that point. You know, the 2019 Bowie rotation was a bunch of guys who you thought reasonably could help. You know, Dean Kramer started there. I don't think Keegan Aiken did. I think he was in AAA, but like, you know, Alex Wells, Zach Lowther. We're not talking about guys with like monster stuff, but we're talking about guys who were well regarded and were the future of pitching, better or worse. Mike Bauman, he exists. You know, Grayson Rodriguez and DL Hall were in that mix. I think they were trying to improve a lot of what was already here and like, you know, try to raise the floor and kind of platform a new system there. And I think the hitting side was able to, because of how this front office wanted to draft, to they were able to bring in the raw tools and the talents that they wanted to on the hitting side. And then through 2020, hiring guys like Anthony Villa, Ryan Fuller, some of those early hitting guys, they were able to build a program around that. And Alt-Site and like pandemic kind of put that into hyperdrive in a way that they weren't able to really do on the pitching side, because the Alt-Site for pitching was just trying to get guys ready for the big leagues. You know, Grayson Rodriguez and DL Hall were there. Mike Bauman was there. Kyle Bradish was there. Those were the best of the guys who were not like big league ready. You know, Dean Kramer is there. Bruce Zimmerman is there. All those guys were there. They made their debuts. It was awesome for them. So I think it was different things. And I think that what you're kind of seeing now is like, when 2021 hit and all of a sudden there were just guys raking up and down the system, like that's kind of like what's happening with like the 22 to an extent. You kind of saw like the sprouts of it, but this 23 draft class on the pitching side is like, all right, here's what we're actually doing. And so in that sense, yes, they're behind. I think there's a distinction to be made about like the goals and the personnel and kind of the processes. And I think to develop pitching from the absolute ground up is different than what they were trying to do in the moment then, I think.
Go now to a pitcher who is up at AA that has stood out so far this season. He turned in perhaps the best outing of his professional career over the weekend, and that's Levi Wells. Facing Portland on Saturday, he went a career-high 6 innings, giving up just 2 runs on 3 hits with 2 strikeouts to 1 walk. Wells, who showcases flat-out dominant stuff at his best, has pitched very well so far at AA this season, posting a 3.08 ERA with a 3.54 FIP and a 3.6 FFIP over 26 and a third innings pitched. What is interesting is that if you look at the strikeout numbers compared to last year, they are down quite a bit. Last year, Wells struck out 26% of the hitters that he faced at High A Aberdeen. That figure is down to 20.7% so far in AA, but along the way, he has gotten better across the board. The walks, which were a significant problem for him, not just last year at Aberdeen, but really going back to his college days at Texas Tech, are down this year. So in a lot of areas, Wells has shown improvement, and I think that if you came into the season holding out hope that he could be a starter, so far, you have to be feeling pretty good about that proposition, because after beginning this season in a tandem role out of the bullpen, Wells has now turned in 3 pretty solid starts in a row for the Bay Sox. So, John, I'll start with you here. We got a taste of what Wells is capable of when he came back off the IL last year at Aberdeen, and then again this year in Major League Spring Training for a little bit, which is that he can flash elite stuff, but the results have often not been there for him. So far this year, though, even if it's not exactly how you would have drawn it up as the strikeout numbers, they have been there for him in AA. So does he seem to be turning a corner a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. He was somebody, you know, I think last year, like, you know, what we can see limited based on like expected stuff on the outside. You know, it wasn't as bad as it seemed like it was. but I think I think there was an adjustment to pro ball that was happening there, that, and just, adjusting to new routines, and getting himself in like a space to go out there and perform well, I think is something that you need to figure out how to do when you go from college ball to pro ball. I think last year was a process of him doing that. Nobody ever questioned the stuff in any way, period. Nobody, people, scouts would come into Aberdeen and ask me about him. This year I went to Bowie and the coaches would not stop talking about him. It's stuff that is, high level stuff. I was texting a little bit with a scout that was up in Portland, and he said, Portland wasn't a very good lineup, but like nobody would have looked good against Wells the way that he was pitching. Like, it was just that kind of stuff. The challenge is that it's, you can easily see, and I think the Orioles are going to have to make this choice with some people. Some people, if they have a bunch of if they have a broad pitch mix and a starter's mentality and starter's, routine, you keep them on that track. And some people just throw the heck out of the ball and have a really good slider. And if we're talking and have the raw ingredients to go out there and blow it out and attack major league hitters out of the bullpen. And that is a choice that they're going to have to start to make. You're not going to make that choice when somebody's just starting a second full season in Double-A. It's a choice they're going to have to make eventually. And I'm fascinated to see how it goes. But, he wasn't in the top 30. I think he was in I think he might have been in the 31 to 40, because you can't deny the stuff. If I was ranking based on, if I had TrackMan data, and if I was ranking based on that, he would have been very, very high on the list. The stuff is really, really good. And it wasn't so much results as just as I guess the pro ball growing pains and stuff like that made it so that he wasn't on there. And I think what you're seeing now is somebody has a lot of experience under his belt and is putting it to good use.
Yeah, and the stuff was great last year, and it's ticked up even more this year. Velocity's higher, feels like he's just sharper, and I feel like we've seen this a lot with pitchers. Once they get to Double-A, the strikeout rate will dip, but so will the walk rate. It's almost like they're focusing on just get the ball in the zone, around the zone. It's almost like they're teaching them that, like the Chase McDermott thing, your stuff is so good that even if it's in the plate, they're not going to do much with it, even if they make contact. And then it seems like once they get to AAA, they kind of let it fly again. And it's nice to see. I think it's really cool. I think it's a huge step in Levi Wells' development. I was very impressed with, he only had 2 strikeouts, but just the efficiency to go 6 innings was really cool.
And with that, now we will go into our final segment. Last Call, brought to you by Checker Spot Brewing, located at 1421 Ridgely Street. Checker Spot Brewing is not far from Camden Yards, making it the perfect place for a pre- or post-game beverage. And with the Orioles in town all week, with the homestand against the Minnesota Twins and the Washington Nationals, you will have plenty of opportunities to get there. So be sure to check that out. And when you're at the game, you can find one of Checker Spot's signature beers, the Bird is the Word, at the concession stand behind home plate. And now for our last call, I'm going to step in here to throw out this question, which is, we talked about Nestor Herman a lot tonight. We've talked about a lot of the pitchers in the Orioles farm system. So this is relevant to the fact, John, you have the list of Baseball America you put together every offseason, and then we have our own list here on the show. So make your early guess at the top pitching prospect in the system at season's end. Nestor Herman or the field? John, I'll start with you.
Nestor Herman or the field. I think it's going to be hard, and I don't think Michael Ferret's injury is going to be something that keeps him out for any meaningful amount of time. I think it's going to be hard, given his age, given his stuff profile, for someone to overtake him. But if Nestor Herman is in AAA and ready to help, that would challenge it. I might take the field. And this doesn't feel like a fair bet for the list I'm going to make, so I might just think about this conversation and be like, well, I said I wasn't going to do it, so I won't do it. But I think that I think I would go with the field because I think I'm really fascinated to see all these guys. Once things settle down, hopefully the Orioles get a little better and I can spend a little more time in Bowie. But I'm gonna stick with the field and because I think that Ferret has I think Ferret's where he is for a reason.
Yeah, it's so close to me that if you're giving me the option of the field, I'm going to take the field because, I mean, you still might have McDermott and Young eligible by the end of the year. We'll see the way the pitching has been, maybe not. But regardless, I think Ferret is right there, especially if he can come back relatively soon. Braxton Bragg is just skyrocketed. Erman Gibson is, like you said, number 4 on Kylie's list. Levi Wells, Cameron Weston. It's surprisingly deep at the top of the pitching there. But I think I'm going to specify Braxton Bragg as the main man. Keeler Morphe, let's hope that the finger injury was what was causing those control issues and he can get back healthy because his ceiling's enormous as well. But yeah, Braxton Bragg is going to be my pick for top pitching prospect. I just think he's almost too good for AA at this point. He's still like striking out 35+% and walking not many. So that's my guess. But Erman, yeah, he's going to be in the mix. That's for sure.
I've been saying probably since the spring, maybe even earlier in the offseason, that I thought Michael Ferret was going to be the top pitching prospect in the system by the end of the season. And I agree with John that injury should not be a long-term thing. And as long as there's no injury on the back end of that or there's no lasting effect from it, I think he is going to be that guy. But Herman is really pushing it right now. So it's going to be interesting to see how things play out for the rest of the season. John, it's always good to have you on here. And before you go, let our listeners know, I think a lot of them are reading the banner at this point, hopefully listening to the podcast as well. But let our listeners know what's coming up over at the banner.
Gosh, well, like I said, I've had to move my time allotment sliders pretty heavily towards Camden Yards based on everything that's been happening. It feels like it's my job to actually write about this team. I don't really get to make my side quest down to Bowie as much as I want to, but I mentioned, I think in the last episode, I'm trying to figure out like a nice way or a way to write about like what the season's been like and like the mental. I don't even know what you call it. It's not like anguish. It's just like every time I think about like how the season has gone, I basically like go into a spiral because it's like if I thought X and Y and Z was going to happen, like why was it wrong? Was it wrong? Like it's good times. Good times. It's probably really fun for everyone to read. But you will know that the Orioles season has either like completely tanked and is over or recovered when the Arms on the Farm series returns. Because that will mean that there will be an appetite for it. Either people won't be like, what are you doing writing about Trey Gibson when this team's falling apart? Or like the season will be so over that like they'll be like, give me the Trey Gibson content. Let's go. Arms on the Farm. Who's next?
Yeah, every time it seems like things are going to turn around, they inevitably crash again. So yeah, that's very relatable.
Yeah, hey, they're at least winning going into off days recently because then it's like 2 full days of not losing.
Yeah, and it sometimes makes our shows a little bit happier on Mondays, but I'm not counting on that being the case the rest of the season.
Hey, we're doing the same thing. Like we're recording Tuesday mornings. It's like if the best ones are the ones where like there's not like 9 different things that people are upset about from the night before. It makes it a little easier to go on.
Fire everybody. Start over. We got to rebuild all over again.
Just waiting for people to say I should go to jail. To go to our last conversation, though, what if this is the year that they're finally like, you know what? Let's take like an SEC starting pitcher. Everyone thinks we need pitching. Like watch this. They just take some big guy that struck out like 100 guys in like 70 innings in college, and then they get to like they're not going to do. This is not why they would do it, but it's to get to savor like they're listening. Like those victories.
Right. Yeah.
Finally, they realize they need pitching. They drafted a pitcher.
Fortunately, it seems like the front office doesn't really care what the fans think, and they're going to stick with the process. So.
No, I don't think anybody in that room is going to be having that conversation. Although they
would be funny.
If they did, they might be using a similarly mocking tone that I am.
So what happens first? The Orioles go on Fan Reaction and take a pitcher in the first round, or Brandon Hyde plays Adley behind the plate 7 days in a row, including 2 day games after night games.
Whatever. Gosh, we're probably close to option B. I was reading one of the stories from the game on Sunday. I was like, Maverick Handley was only playing his 4th game. I was like, he's only played in 4 games.
He's been up a while.
He's up for, like, I know it's only 2 weeks, but it feels like a lot more. Like, geez, in one of those games, he came in late.
Yeah. Good for him, though. That's a good story, too.
Yeah, no, great story. Great story. What a draft. 2019 draft.
Oh, it's epic.
Yeah.
And for that does it this week. We will be back next week to break down all the latest news in Birdland. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, YouTube, and Twitch. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And while you're browsing around the internet, checking out our Substack and the Baltimore banner, be sure to head over to Patreon and sign up, become a member today. You can sign up for $3, $5, or $10 a month and have access to bonus weekly coverage from Bob, Nick, and myself, as well as monthly updates to our top 50 prospects list. Thank you to John Meoli, the Baltimore banner, for joining us. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, part of the Believe Podcast Network.
You know where your business would be without you. Imagine where it could go with more of you. Well, with Wix, you can create a website with more of your vision, your voice, your expertise. Wix gives you the freedom to truly own your brand and do it on your own, with full customization and advanced AI tools that help turn your ideas into reality. Grow your business into your online brand. Because without you, your business is just business as usual. Go to Wix.com.